Hello, I'm Bob Booker and welcome to our channel. Today I'm going to be talking about another Booker longlisted book, this time Treacle Walker by Garner. And in many ways this was one of the books on the list that was probably one of the most surprising for people, myself included, partly because it's a short book by an author who is sort of known for having written quite a lot of sort of children's books, as well as others in the past. A book that I don't think had sort of been on many people's lists for sort of being there for this prize, but also just, you know, a book that seems so left field compared to a lot of the others anyway. It's full of myth and fairy tales and folklore and various other things going on. And just seems like such an interesting take. But often it is those sorts of books that find themselves on prize lists, because if you imagine for the judges, who I think read, I want to say it was 169 books this year, or it was a really high number. It was sort of it was above 140, 150. And that's a lot of books to be reading. So a short, slim book that's so distinctive like this one probably would stick out enough for you to sort of think, actually, yeah, this is kind of worthy of being on this list. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about it. There will be some light spoilers. In many ways, it's quite a weird and tricky book to try and spoil, because it kind of just is this one big, you know, sort of fairy tale almost. But let's get into it. But yeah, I'll announce before I go into anything too spoilery. But it should be fairly easy to watch, even if you've not read the book, I think. So this book largely focuses around three characters, and characters even in that feels like quite a strange word to use, because, you know, two of them don't really seem to be particularly human. It's a very strange book. So we have Joe, who's this sort of young boy, and we have Thin Amron, and we also have the sort of titular Treacle Walker kind of character. And it sort of basically starts with Joe discovering sort of something happening. I'm trying to be quite cautious here, just I don't want to spoil too much, but essentially coming across quite a sort of scenario happening, and in all of that, in this sort of moment where he is sort of waking up, we get these full sort of descriptions of this very weird world. It's very clear to Joe quite quickly that something's quite wrong and that something's quite different, not only because he's talking to the Treacle Walker, who's this sort of random other figure, but also because all of these stories seem to be so fantastical and so otherworldly. And so we get this sort of lengthy passage of talking about his eyesight, and he basically has this sort of special kind of eyesight where if he looks through one of his eyes, he's able to see things that are not quite there to most other people. And this is sort of seen as an example of him being quite special and almost this sort of chosen one in this sort of tale that he sort of finds himself in. And what then follows is this sort of discussion really about so many other things, about belonging, and particularly this idea of belonging to the land. Like, this book feels very tied to where it's from, in this sort of Cheshire kind of area. And sort of, you know, everything around this book feels like it's tied to local myth and local tales and local stories. And so as a result, Joe feels like this sort of, he's sort of part of the land. He's sort of part of this history and this experience of having been in this world, and he therefore belongs in these tales just as much as anybody else, just as much as the sort of the tales themselves. And it kind of just becomes this sort of bizarre thing. It's really quite hard to follow at times, because it's so off on sort of various tangents. But essentially he is sort of trying to get back to normality, to his world in some way, and in the meantime he's also finding out a little bit more about what he can do that's special with his eyes. He's sort of collecting eggs, he's sort of reading comics, he talks a lot about marbles and all of these are sort of like traditionally, you know, like these things that young kids might be sort of interested in, particularly of a sort of an older generation. And yet he's then sort of brought into this world that's so full of the fantastical and the otherworldly and the surreal. And he also basically almost feels like a pawn in the game between the Treacle Walker and Finn Amryn, who seem to have this sort of long-standing feud of sorts. And it's kind of just magical. I had no real sort of point of reference for how I was going to enjoy this. I didn't know if I'd hate this, if I'd love it, if I'd be really confused by it. I think I mostly really enjoyed it. I think I was definitely confused by it, but something about it just works and holds together because there's something so beautiful about the playfulness, I think, of this book. It's a book that plays a lot with language and often we'll get these sort of long descriptions of stories and you can almost hear the sort of the joy being found in the language of these words tripping off the tongue. And I will say on that, I listened to it as an audiobook, which I really recommend, because it sort of just flows. It's almost, just under 2 hours and you're just listening to this really quite bizarre tale and it kind of just needs to wash over you. It's surreal and wonderful and beautiful. And I'm really keen to go and read other work by him. But yeah, it's a weird one. It's a very weird one. And I just sort of want to add that sort of strangeness in this tale is what makes this just so much fun, because as we build towards the end, anybody who's read any sort of folklore or tales in the past, you will kind of get a sense of where this book's going, because there are sort of the tropes, I guess, of folklore and fairy tales and things like that. And this book in many ways plays with a lot of those same tropes. And I won't spoil where I'm going with that, but it kind of, there's something quite satisfying in sort of living within that world of where this book is taking us. And I just thought it was a really special book. I don't know if this is my choice for the shortlist or as a winner, but I'm really glad that this long listing has made me check this book out. And it's also given a little bit of extra love to an author who's been writing for many years and sort of deserves a little bit of extra love, it seems. I've been Bob the Booker, talking about Treacle Walker. I feel like there's not too much more to say because it's such a small and unique and special book. And I think you have to just sort of live in the confusion of this book. I don't think trying to understand it works. I think it actually is a book where the joy is in not understanding and is in being lost and just sort of being part of this little world for the couple of hours that you're there. I've been Bob, talking about this book. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.